Well, if that's not a description of what you're trying to do all day, every day, I don't know what it is, because our unhappiness is rooted in like, things aren't the way that I want. But within there, you have to be careful around, well, can I change this or not? And if I can change it, like, what's the risk return curve? You know, just because I can change it doesn't mean I should. Sam Cooke, Ray Charles, and all them came out of gospel and blues sort of mixed together.
Do you play music? Do you make music?
Yeah, I play the guitar and sing. I mostly like to sing. And so I play the guitar and can fake a little bit on the piano, mostly to accompany my voice.
Okay. And what type of music do you sing?
I'll play like acoustic blues, blues that goes back to like the 30s, 40s, 50s. And then just some other, like soul music, folk tunes, things like that. Mostly stuff that was written well before I was born.
I saw John Mayer and B.B. King do a set together, and that made me fall in love with blues.
Yeah. I've seen B.B. King probably 8 times or something before he passed away. He used to come to a theater that's pretty close to me called the Keswick Theater. I love B.B. King. Yeah, and he used to play with Bobby Bland, who was my favorite blues singer that ever lived. They grew up together, actually, and I think it was in Memphis, where Beale Street is in Memphis, isn't it?
We're going to say yes. We'll have fact checkers.
Let's go for yes. Yeah.
So you were at Google. Tell me a little bit about what you did there.
Yeah, I went to Google because I was starting to get, I got more and more experience. I had my previous role before that, I was the CTO at a tech startup and building systems at a scale that I wasn't used to. I thought was exciting, learning a lot about distributed systems. But I wanted to have that feeling again of having trouble keeping up, which I hadn't had in a while. I remember when I first got started in my career, I felt like I was constantly scribbling, trying to learn about all these things. And while I'm not suggesting I'd gotten to the point where I knew everything, I had known enough where I found myself at the whiteboard more often than I found myself asking questions and trying to learn and things like that. And so I said to myself, well, Google would be a place where I would have trouble keeping up. And separately, I wanted to learn about managing systems at scale, learning more and more about distributed systems, which is the lifeblood of Google, and they've had to push the boundaries on things. So that's why I went there. I started out in the storage organization, way at the bottom, where all the bits are stored. So all the information that Google has that you could imagine, like Gmail attachments and emails and search results or search queries and things like that, and photos and cloud data, all that stuff is stored in the same systems way at the bottom. And so I got to manage the storage efficiency organization, which was responsible for coming up with creative engineering approaches, whether from a planning perspective or a technical perspective, that would allow Google to save as much money as possible on their storage spend. And the thing that was great about it is I got to work with some really, really great people that that were experts in the space. And storage is a space where a lot of distributed systems knowledge has emerged from. NoSQL databases, all those things were pioneered at Google. So I got to learn about Bigtable, which was the first NoSQL database that basically has ever existed. I got to learn about Spanner, which is Google's strongly consistent inter-region relational database, which basically offers the dream properties that you wish you had in a relational database years ago. Got to learn about the distributed file system. So a lot of technical learnings. And then in addition, I got to work with a lot of the different groups, Cloud, Gmail, all these folks. And then finally, I worked with some individuals whose knowledge and experience was just mind-blowing for me. So yeah, it was a great ride. In that role, I also spun up a team and managed that team to build a system to combat capacity stockouts for Google Cloud. So the stockout is just a metaphor, is if you go to if you go to a corner store and you're looking for a bag of Doritos and the Doritos aren't there, they're stocked out, you're pretty disappointed, right? Well, you're even more disappointed if you're a cloud customer and you ask for a VM of a reasonable shape in a certain geography and it's not there. That's something that you're going to be very disappointed about because it can break your business. So these stockouts were hurting Google Cloud, and we spun up a system and worked on a system and got it out there that helped to combat those stockouts and informed their capacity planning.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. And then finally, I worked in the on the cloud observability platform, logs, metrics, traces, all the things that that engineers need in order to run and scale their systems. I was responsible for the data ingestion aspects of that. And it was really high impact, a lot of fun. It was interesting to work on products where if you made a good move or a bad move, it would affect hundreds of thousands of customers across most businesses that you can name. Very high impact, a lot of fun. Got to work with a lot of great people.
What makes a good engineering manager?
I think the first thing is that they have to see themselves in service of the engineers and business outcomes. So when people ask me, what my job is as a leader, and I think that's irrespective of whether you're a VP or a director or an eng manager, all of which, I've been at different points, is my job is to get the right business outcomes while helping you to do your very best work. And I don't stack rank them. I try to make sure that they go together. So if I'm getting great results, but I'm not growing the engineers or the other leaders on my team, because I think this is a question about leadership and management in general. If I'm getting results but not growing the people on my team, I consider myself to be failing. If I'm growing my people but I'm not getting business results, I consider myself to be failing. And so I have to make sure that I can do both. Now, that said, I've never worked in a nonprofit area, so I think of business results. But for the most part, what that means is I have to be conscious, for example, when I line up projects or programs for people to focus on, I'm always doing something that will help the business. I'll never encourage doing something that isn't in service of the business. I've never worked at a research university. I don't plan to.
Me either.
Yeah. But when I also think about the who should work on what, I think about the business needs, a person's strengths, and a person's interests. And the business need alignment has to be there. But a person's strengths and a person's interest, there's hopefully material overlap, but they're not always the same thing. So I might be very strong at, writing Java code, but my interest is, I want to build world-class machine learning models. Well, if I don't have that need on that team, your interests aren't going to be well served. But ideally, you have other interests that overlap with your strengths. But sometimes you ask people, hey, can you take one for the team here? You're really great at X, even though you're not excited about doing it. And then in other cases, if you can accept a little bit of risk on a project, then you'll go out of your way to make sure that somebody gets to learn on that project. They get to learn a new skill set that they're excited about. So there are constant trade-offs that you have to make sure that you're getting business results and helping people to grow. Those are the things I think about most anyway.
Yeah, I mean, those are great things. How do you do both well? Like, how do you do both the business outcomes and making sure that the people have these needs and strengths and interests all aligned? Like, how do you do that really well?
It's hard. I don't claim to have a magic algorithm, but I think the thing that helps the most is I demonstrate to people that I care about them as individuals. And that's usually the thing that comes across most when I leave a place and people say, hey, what was it like to work with Joe? They'll usually, he really cares about people. And it's not like I wake up and focus on that per se, but I think that through the actions I take, I demonstrate that I do care about them. And when you care about somebody, it tends to enable trust. And trust, unlocks unlocks a lot of things, accelerating business results, people being willing to go the extra mile. So, and then another thing that supports it is I'm very transparent, or I try to be, about decisions. So if I have to make a tough call about something for an organization, whether large or small, if it's a non-trivial decision, not only will I'll consult with a lot of people, but if it's my decision to make, I'll make the decision, but then I try to spend a decent amount of time explaining the why. And so even if people might not agree with the logic, at least they understand where you're coming from.
So I want to get your insight on this when you were talking about caring about people and leading them. So I actually had a conversation, I think last week, with one of my directors, and we were discussing this idea of, I was asking about his individual contributors and all of that. And we were, I had asked him something, I think along the lines of, well, yeah, like which person on your team is a morning person, or like what, who wakes up early, or who's the person that's like the night owl and stuff like that. And, he said something along the lines of, well, that doesn't really, matter. Like we just focus on, in our one-on-ones, we just focus on their metrics and like if they're hitting their goals and things like that. And I said, well, I heard this one speaker in personal development one time say that you can't, the idea that you can manage or lead somebody without knowing who they are and caring for them is a myth. Like you have to know who they are and care for them in order to lead them. And so I was just giving him examples and like talking with him about this. I felt like I was kind of fishing around because the problem is that it's not a science. Because if I say like get to know them, it's not like you can, well, some people might take that as like, and let's have a meeting and all of a sudden start interrogating them. It's this really
Where were you
weird.
born? Yeah. What are your kids' names? Yeah.
So how do you, and I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but how would you go about explaining to a new leader how to have a personal relationship with the people you're managing, but not crossing boundaries?
Yeah, that's a good one. I'm not sure I've ever had to address this directly, but I suppose one of the things that I do is when people are trying to decide whether they want to go into management, I try to pressure test the why. And so when I went into management, I just fell ass backwards into it. You know what I mean? You do good on it when you start out, you write code, you build systems, you do good at that. You get responsibility for a larger system. Before you know it, you're leading others in a technical fashion. And then before you know it, people are like, hey, you want to manage people? And it just seems like, okay, that's the next rung on the ladder. Let me try that. But that's usually not a great recipe for success. But the truth is that a lot of us, that's how we get started. And in hindsight, you look back and you realize, wow, I've made a lot of mistakes. But I'm glad that somebody gave me the opportunity to try that. But ultimately, when somebody says, oh, I want to be a manager, or I want to lead larger teams, or, whatever the thing may be, I try to tease apart the why. And so if you ask, if you try to tease apart, like, what are your motivations? Well, hey, what do you think this is going to look like? Oh, well, I'll get to call the shots. And, obviously there's elements of being a manager is, generally a manager has to be a leader. A leader does not have to be a manager. But there are parts of being a manager, if you've never done it before, that might seem attractive. Oh, they got to make the call on X, or, oh, they got to, set somebody's performance review rating, and that has a lot of impact. But the truth is, most of the time, the job of a manager isn't always directly rewarding. There's a lot of hard work that goes into it that's thankless. There's, you got to approve expense reports and timesheets and deal with all kinds of issues between people in an organization, help deal with them without anybody ever knowing. It's a fairly thankless job a lot of the time. But the thing that makes a difference for me is if I can affect somebody's life positively, if I can in some sense be of service, that gives me personal reward. I find that rewarding, and it doesn't have to be, plastered on a newspaper. The reward is actually, for me, is actually private. The fact that I was able to make a small difference in somebody's life. And so I try to tease apart the why and find out if there's an element of wanting to be of service in what they want to do. And if I can't find that element of wanting to be of service, that is enabling other people, helping them to grow, unlocking business results, helping people to overcome their challenges and connect better with others. If I can't find that servant leadership aspect, then I usually call that out in people and say, look, I'm not seeing that. And my experience is that's the foundation of good leadership. So it doesn't mean that I won't support you in becoming a manager, but I think that that's a component that I think is an important part, and that you would either need to bring to the table or grow in the direction of wanting to develop that.
And you can tell so much by how they react to that advice.
Yeah. They're like, whoa, hey, I don't want to fill out TPS reports.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of things that come with being a manager that aren't always fun. And so when you paint the picture of what it looks like, I would say half the people walk away from it. You do have to do a little bit of a reverse sell, because I think that it's different than a lot of people realize. Maybe in the command and control days, which I've never lived in, it was more fun because you had, direct power. You could, control all the things. But that's just not real life, at least not in the space of building software. You've got brilliant people that are smarter than you, and you're trying to figure out, okay, how can I help them to succeed without getting in their way? And it's tricky business.
The story of my life, man.
Mm-hmm.
When you talk about wanting to be of service, you've mentioned that a number of times. Does this extend, like who you are as a person, does this extend outside of your professional career? Does it extend into your personal life?
Well, my personal life is it's not very complicated. It's, most of my time I spend with my wife and kids and reading. That's pretty much my whole personal life. So, there are some times where I've, done community service and things like that, but frankly, they're not that much.
No, I mean, just like the people in your life, would the people in your life outside of work would probably similarly describe you as the people at work, as far as your...
I think so. I think that I'm an introvert, and so my social life is pretty contained and pretty simple, and it's mostly oriented around my wife and kids. But when I think about my extended family or old friends and things like that, yeah, I think it comes across. I've
got 3 kids between ages, a daughter who's 5, a son who's 4, and a son who is 7 months. So when you talk about social life, I'm like, what do you mean? I was like, everyone's an introvert when you, or everyone has a low social life when you have children. It's like, that's my crew. It's my wife and my kids. They're like, are the center of my universe. So
yeah, I have 4 myself, going from 19 down to 12. And 3 kids is around when the discrimination kicks in. That's when the people start looking at you funny, or if you go to visit somebody, hey, I'm going to pop by, and then you get a pause, and they're like, you bringing the kids?
Yeah.
Where somehow 1 is easy, 2 is cute, 3 is like, okay,
yeah,
make a reservation in advance before you come by.
Yeah, we have several friends who have 5, and my parents, they came from families of 7. They were one of 7. And so it's amazing to me how I go around in life, and we got a lot of 20 somethings, early 30s people that work at our media company. And I think I'm the only, and Josh, jump in and correct me, I think I'm the only one that has kids. Yeah, out of all of us. And I go around and I run into different people like that don't have kids. And I mean, not to let the conversation go into a negative way, but it seems like a fairly selfish reason is why. Like, and I'm not saying that that's good or bad, but I wish I could somehow extend to them the experience of, you're going to be giving up your time and you're going to be giving up a lot, but I believe you're going to gain more than you give up through the experience.
Yeah, and I always use having kids as an example of where, like, we really have 2 systems of thinking figuratively our head and our heart. Kids are not logical. Having kids is not a logical investment. So for people that are hyper logical, having kids makes very little sense. But it's the heart thing. It's kind of somehow wanting to, I don't know. It's like once you start to take care of them and they develop their little personalities, it changes your life in huge ways, in ways that you can't communicate to people who haven't done it before. And it's not all roses, right?
Oh, no.
But it's your whole worldview changes. What's most important to you, and the definition of fun changes.
For sure. I mean, I spent money on a fence the other day. I'm like, how did I get here in life? And I was excited about the different fence I picked out and all of that. Like, this is, I was like, this is the progression of life, Yeah. What are you reading? You said you like to read a lot. What type of stuff are you reading?
Oh, yeah, I read a lot of stuff. I have a reading sort of ritual, I guess, where I get up, semi early, at least for me, given the way that I'm wired. I get up around 6:30, eat breakfast, and then I have my reading ritual in the morning. I sort of read a few spiritual books, but they're like one pagers, like things that they can serve as devotionals. Mm-hmm. And so I'll flip through a few pages that are of a spiritual nature, a few that are of like a business nature. And then some that are like of a ethical nature. That takes like a half hour. But that's like me, I think it's the equivalent of people doing their meditation or sitting in a bathtub of ice cubes or whatever other people do to start their day. And after that, I usually do a longer, technical reading, depending on what I'm interested in, or if I'm in a spot where I have to learn about something at work to be effective, which is most of the time. I find I have to read voraciously to even keep up with the pace of technology change, especially given the type of work that I do. I've been, in infrastructure and platforms and things like that. So, but the good thing is, if I'm excited about what I'm doing, it doesn't feel at all like work. So I don't know, some of the things that I'm thinking about at the moment technically are, I happen to think are the connectivity story between services in a heterogeneous environment, like where if you have Kubernetes and VMs and Google Cloud and AWS, this is like an example of how things were at Twilio. The connectivity story between services is such a mess. It's very, very complicated, and it's getting more and more complicated. So that's an example of something that I've been reading a lot about lately. And
what are you learning in the spiritual content?
I've drifted into, at the moment, so I was raised Catholic, but I'm not, a practicing Catholic. But I've drifted into other things over time. I find that Jewish ethics, for example, is a space that I like a lot. And it's not even a religious orientation for me. I don't consider myself to be particularly religious. It's very methodical and rich in all the history around how the rabbis came to conclusions around the right way to treat one another. And the thing that I like about it is it doesn't just give you the answer. It shows you the debate over time. Oh, this rabbi said this rabbi said that. And then in the end, there isn't a whole lot of there are some agreements on this is considered the authoritative ruling, but somebody can come along later and always displace it in theory. So there's a lot of debate around the right way to live, and I find that pretty interesting. And then another thing that I've been reading a lot lately is centered around Stoicism. So Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus, for example, are some of the foundational writers in Stoicism. And I find that's helping me a bit because there's Stoicism is one of its foundational viewpoints is, hey, there's a whole lot of stuff that's going to go on and you can't change it. Get used to feeling it, accepting it, and then having to move on. And when I think about it, I think about like the Serenity Prayer, for example.
That's exactly what I was just thinking about.
Yeah. Even if you put the G word aside, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Well, if that's not a description of what you're trying to do all day, every day, I don't know what it is, because our unhappiness is rooted in like, things aren't the way that I want. I've never experienced things being the way that I want. There are only degrees of dissatisfaction. And so, but within there's, I'm exaggerating. Obviously there have been times where I've been very happy, but within there, you have to be careful around, well, can I change this or not? And if I can change it, like, what's the risk return curve? Just because I can change it doesn't mean I should. And so, for example, I've had situations where I've, like in sports, I've thought about, I'm not excited about how my boys are getting along with certain people in sports, but they're getting older. And I can't be like helicopter dad or something like that. If I try to get involved with, their stock price and how they're perceived by people that can, control their playtime and things like that, it'll just hurt. So I have to step back and actually like let things be. And then other times I have to have the courage to, to make a change. Most of the time that's in my own behavior, So yeah, long story short, Stoicism is one of the things that I'm reading a lot in right now.
Do you ever struggle with like being content?
Yeah. I'm very introspective. If you're introspective and if you're a realist, sometimes, the world doesn't always work the way that you want. And, most of the time it isn't so easy to accept it. That's why I'm reading about it. It's like, oh, can I get good at this? Because I'm definitely not good at it right now.
Yeah, I was struggling with it a little bit over the past year or two. Like, things got really, really good, and I got concerned.
Yeah, I know.
I got concerned because I'm like, what's going on? Like, I'm always battling. Like, since the day I showed up here on this planet, like, I've been battling, and it's just difficulty after difficulty. And right now I'm just in this calm sea, and I'm like, I'm not equipped for that. Like, I'm a wartime general. I'm not equipped for peacetime. Yeah. And then you kind of, but while you're in war, you justify it through achieving peace. So it's this weird sort of thing that I struggle with. And then I go, okay, well, I'm learning right now. I'm 35, just to give you an example of where I'm at in life. But I'm learning right now this sort of ebb and flow or balance of being content, but also doing some challenging stuff or having some challenge. Like, rather than it just being all chaos all the time, trying to, gasp for air. Now I'm like, all right, I'm going to kind of be on this lake, but I'm also going to have some fun. And that is not something that is you do at once. It's something that you just constantly work towards.
Yeah, I know what you mean. That feeling of like, whoa, lightning hasn't struck in a while. You're waiting for the other shoe to drop. Especially if, you've experienced tragedy in your life. I know I read about some of the tragedy that you experienced. It was awful. And I think about, we all have our experiences. One of my toughest experiences was my youngest sister was killed in a car accident. She was 27 years old. She was months away from her wedding date, and it was just like that, and there are no, for me personally, there are no religious things that help me with that. I had to work through that, and in some sense work towards acceptance of like, this is the reality, and look back at all the great times that we did have. But then like if you have enough of those things in your life, you start to tell your story in terms of like, well, this was phase one, and phase one was rooted around this tragedy. And then phase two was rooted around this tragedy, and phase three is rooted. And that's not a good way to think about life. And for me, I'm trying to change that, and
I will disagree with you for myself. So I find it very empowering to do that. I use it all the time. Now that's just, me. But what I have found is things like, holding my mom's hand as she passed away, or getting hit by a car when I was 12 and being in a wheelchair for a year, or, all of these other difficult experiences that I've had. I keep them close to me. Like, I'm not like holding on in pain, right? Like I've worked through it all, and now I'm just looking at it logically as, they're important lessons to me, and they remind me that no matter how hard, let me give you an example. I run a business, right? I'm an entrepreneur. Like, obviously there's a lot of stuff going on in the marketplace right now, hence, your job movement. And so like, there's a lot of waves going on right now. And then I'll notice myself getting a little bit like caught up in that. And then I'll just, be laying down at night. My wife and I pray before we go to bed, and that's, how does that actually look? It essentially looks like us just talking about stuff and talking to God. And what happens is I realize that, that doesn't matter. Like, that's not nearly as hard as like letting your mom pass away in your arms. Like, what, a down quarter? Well, we're actually doing well this quarter, but like a quarter with turmoil in the marketplace. I'm like, see, so it kind of helps me set things in perspective, or when I'm going to do something difficult, I was like, I've been hit by a car and had to learn how to walk again. Like, this is so easy compared to that. And so, that's how I will use it. But I do agree. We don't know each other super well, right? We're meeting each other for the first time, but there is definitely some fine nuance into people holding on and with pain and using tragedy, letting tragedy affect their lives versus like taking it and owning it and using it as a tool of power.
Yeah. So all the things that you said, I agree with, and B, I relate to. What I meant was more like, I don't want to define my life in terms of it.
Okay.
And so it's very easy, I think, on some level for me to do that. It's like, oh, that was my down period because of X, and that was my down period because of Y. But yeah, I think that tragedy brings meaning to your life. You have to have a little rain in order to appreciate the sunshine. And I look back on the moments that I had with my sister, with other people that I've lost, and they're now profound. I can look back on those positive moments with like profound joy, when before they were just things that happened. I on a comparative basis, I will occasionally think about those things to derive strength from too, like, how's the presentation go, or what do my quarterly results look like, how did this performance review go? Those things pale in comparison to what it's like to lose somebody that you love, or what it's like to have some other senseless tragedy hit you. There's a saying that nobody on their deathbed, nobody ever wished that they spent more time at the office. I don't think in the end, distributed systems are going to matter much when I go to the grave. It's going to be, did I make a difference in somebody's life?
I 100% agree. Now, if you don't like using the tragedies to help sort of define the timeline of your life, what do you use in place of that?
I don't know, because I consciously, it's not as if I've ever told my story end to end, but I suppose that, like when I think about the birth of my kids is an example of something that changed my life in a positive way. When I think about what it was like to learn to play music, what it was like to go to college, and, surrounded by people that, were pretty wealthy, and I, came from a working class background, and I think I was able to appreciate like the things that were in front of me, because of that. Like the idea that I could just go study whatever I want, and that my dad would be okay with it. Like, my dad was a Philly cop, and I was one of 5 kids, one of 5 or 8, depending on how you count. And it blew my mind that he even paid for me to go to school. I went to the University of Pennsylvania, which is not a cheap school, but I had a full scholarship to go to St. Joe's, which is also in the Philadelphia area. And he said, pick whichever one you want. He didn't try to twist my arm one way or the other. I'm not sure I would have had the strength to do that. But he did tell me years later, like every now and then when times were tough, I would drive and park next to St. Joe's and say, Joe could have gone there for free. But like, I don't know, like those are some of the positive things. And like my boys playing lacrosse, like I played lacrosse in high school, and I played to some degree, mostly informally, every sport that you could imagine. And to me, lacrosse was just like no other sport. I just loved it. And so I taught my boys how to play, and now they love it, and they don't love it because I loved it. They love it because they figured out that it's great for them to watch them play, to play together on the same team. They're, one of them is on JV, one of them is on varsity, but they're like warriors out there. It's a great thing, So I guess what I'm getting at is finding, in addition to the valleys, calling out the peaks as well when I think about my life.
No, that's exactly what I take notes, by the way, if I'm looking down, but that's exactly what I was thinking as you were talking is, I made a little list of the positive: birth of kids, learning to play music, college. And then, you talk about the more difficult moments of losing your sister
and marrying my wife
and marrying your wife. Yep. Sorry.
We'll edit this so that I put that in first in case she watches. No, seriously though, let me make a plug for my wife.
Okay.
Really, like to have somebody that sees you and like really sees you and doesn't feel like you're a project that has potential. It's like, no, she sees me as I am and is okay with me. And in fact, more than tolerates me, actually likes me, actually loves me. I'm like, that's a great feeling. That's a great feeling because you don't always get that in life. Usually, usually you always get the sense, whether it's self-imposed or coming from other people, it's like, well, you do this okay, but you don't really do that. I don't feel that way with my wife. She likes me the way that I am. So, I've managed to fool her, but hey, I'll take it. So.
Yeah. We are at that point now. We've been together for 10 years. I'd say dating phase was pretty good. Like best friends, having kids. The first 3 years of having our first kid was like super taxing. I was also starting the business then. But for the past 3 or 4 years, I can honestly say without exaggerating that we are best friends. And I actually told her last night, we're going to do real talk right now, Joe. So yesterday, one of my neighbors was talking about this. We have a chicken coop.
Don't worry. I fully confidential and I charge reasonable rates. So.
Oh, I love it. And I said that we had this chicken coop. We were debating to get rid of it and get like a different chicken coop because of X, Y, or Z or whatever. And we had this conversation about 5 months ago. Nothing had happened. And then my neighbor was talking to me. He's like, yeah, we were really interested in that chicken coop. And they had done a favor for me. And I was like, well, yeah, you can have it. Because in my head, it was going to cost us like $500-$600 to get a dumpster out there to break it up and destroy it and like get rid of it. Right. So I was like, oh, we're so lucky because now I got this person who's going to take it for free and it's going to save us money. And then I go and I tell her, and she was like super, super frustrated at me for like not talking with her about it. And so anyways, we're talking at night before we go to bed. And I said, you know what? I go, we're kind of blessed because like the biggest problem in our relationship is that I gave away a chicken coop that you wanted to sell on Facebook Marketplace.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when I step back, it's, it's a gift to have found somebody that sees me, and we're very happy. And like any other marriage, we've had our ups and downs, but I've having the kids and spending time with one another, it's a gift.
The ups and downs, we talked about the positives and the overcoming the difficulty. Is it possible that like those are all different experiences we can draw on and we need different ones at different times. Like it's not always like for example, if I'm in a really difficult moment, the birth of my kids is great, but a moment where I overcame an incredible amount of difficulty is actually the one I would probably want to pull up to handle with that. Or maybe when I'm feeling like I don't have a lot or that I want too much, maybe then I can connect back to the birth of my kids and remind me the material things don't matter. And so we kind of use these different experiences to help you get through the lows and the highs.
Yeah, definitely. They're almost like cards or pictures that you put in your back pocket, and you pull out the right one depending on context. And it's not just personal stuff; it's also professional. Because obviously, I personally, I think we grow from experiences if we reflect upon them. If we have experiences but we don't reflect upon them, then we don't tend to learn as much. And you can learn a certain amount from books and blogs and talks and things like that. But in the end, you have to experience your own things. And yeah, so I can sometimes feel the similarity between something potentially going wrong in a project or a work setting. It's like, ooh, this feels like, when this happened 10 years ago in this other project, what did I do then that helped me to succeed? Or what did I do then that caused me to fail that I don't want to repeat? But yeah, it's like those experiences. They're all sort of like baseball cards or something. You have to find the right one and take them out to help you in that context.
Beautifully said. I'm watching the time here. I think we got about 10 more minutes or so. Is it cool if we do some sort of like rapid fire questions from the audience? We've already sourced some questions about like trust and commitment and things like that.
Go for it.
Leading tech teams. Okay, cool. Let's say day one as a tech leader, you start fresh new company. What's the first action that you'd take to start building trust with your team?
Sit down, talk to them one-on-one, and ask about their life, ask about their background, ask about, what they're hoping to get out of this job, trying to get a sense of the type of work that they like, that they hate. What do they like or not like about the environment? What are some of the things that they would change? So in some sense, it's like trying to get to know them as people. You can get a hook on their morale, and then how they see their career growth, how they see the company. It's sort of, I guess I'm a little bit formulaic about that. That's what I do every single time that I step into a new role, is I start with one-on-ones, people on my team.
What are some effective communication strategies for building trust, and how can leaders ensure that their messages are being received accurately?
So trust sort of, there's a lot of different contexts for trust. If there's trust between two people, that's one flavor of trust. I think there's also trust between yourself and your higher self. That's almost like governing your actions and reflecting. But it sounds to me like this is a question maybe about trust between a leader and their collective organization. I think some of the things that have helped me is be transparent. No bullshit. Like we're all big kids. People know when you're saying fluff. Now, there are some times when, as a leader, you can't say certain things. Like, for example, in the face of a layoff, there's only so many things that you can say. And none of those things are going to make people feel good. But when I think of, like at the first round of layoffs at Twilio, the layoffs hit. They were a big surprise to everybody, including me. And there was just silence, absolute silence. I mean, there was, my boss, for example, hadn't said anything. And I think like the CEO hadn't said anything. And I put myself in their shoes. And I think that's the first part, is put yourself in the other person's shoes and like, what are people feeling right now? And it occurred to me that it reminded me it felt like grief. It felt to me like a little bit like grief. And, like the Kubler-Ross 5 stages of grief. And what I did was I pulled everyone together, and only 15 minutes, And I didn't turn it into an ask me anything thing. I just wanted to do like a really short conversation with them. And I just tried to call out that, like, hey, this is awful. They're like, all I can do is relate to your pain. It's painful for me. This is awful. I'm feeling all kinds of things, like survivor's guilt in a sense. Why them and not me? Some people that got laid off were great at their job. I'm bouncing back and forth between like shock and acceptance. So these were the kind of the things that I talked about, and that we should, the best thing to do, I think, is support those people that were laid off, because if you're feeling bad, imagine how they feel. And then also have patience with one another, because I think different people are going to move through the rough phases at different times. Within a week, some people are like, hey, let's go. It's all business. And then other people are still having a tough time with it, a month later. And so having patience with your colleagues. So basically, I guess in summary, like trying to communicate from a point of view of empathy, that you hear people, that you see people, try and be transparent, no bullshit. Those are, I suppose, some of the things that I did.
I love it. No, we made a podcast. How do you feel?
I feel good.